If you're listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be shared, even if they might shake your faith. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. Have you ever looked at your own wedding photograph and realized the man you swore to love was, in fact, a complete stranger? My name is Isabella Vance Miller, and that is the question that has haunted me for over 40 years, since that fateful morning in May 1982. It all began on a brilliant Sunday morning, May 16, 1982, in Asheville, North Carolina, just after my fairy tale wedding night. To the outside world, it was the perfect start to a blessed life. But how do you explain how the debonair husband, who charmed my entire family, and indeed all of high society, could simply vanish without a trace after a single night? This isn't a work of fiction. This is my true story, a story about the reality hidden beneath the sweetest promises and an identity so masterfully constructed it fooled everyone. And today, I will tell you all, because maybe it's time for other women to know they are not alone in the pain of abandonment, and that yes, it is possible to rebuild an entire life after having your heart shattered on the first day of marriage. I was born in 1960 in Asheville, North Carolina, into an upper-middle-class family that took pride in its traditions and its good name in local society. My father, Harrison Vance, known to everyone as the senator for his political influence and not any elected office, owned one of the largest department stores on Patton Avenue, the main commercial artery of the city. My mother, Helen, came from a family of tobacco farmers who had lost most of their land in the Great Depression but still maintained their social prestige and the refined manners of the old Southern aristocracy. I grew up in a large, airy house in the Biltmore Forest neighborhood, a 2-story home with a garden out front, a backyard with a magnolia tree, and a porch where my mother served iced tea in Limoges porcelain glasses to her friends from the Junior League. It was a home where one breathed Episcopalian tradition, good manners, and the refined education expected of young ladies from good families in the South in the 1970s. My childhood was spent between classes at St. Genevieve of the Pines, a private school that educated the daughters of the Asheville elite, Sunday service at Trinity Episcopal Church, and the piano recitals my mother organized on Saturday nights, where I played Chopin and my younger sister, Clara, recited poems by Robert Frost and Emily Dickinson. We were 3 daughters, me, the eldest, Clara, 2 years younger, and our baby sister Margaret, who was born when I was already 10. Our brother, Harrison Jr., was the natural heir to Dad's business and the pride of the family. He studied business at Duke and returned to Asheville in the late 70s, already talking about modernizing the store, bringing in new trends from Atlanta, and keeping up with the changing times. And the times really were changing. When I turned 18 in 1978, all of America was buzzing with change. The energy crisis and inflation of the 70s were giving way to a new era of ambition. It was the age of disco fading, of the Eagles singing Hotel California on the radio, of skirts getting shorter, of hair styled with feathered bangs, of the first condominium complexes being built downtown. My generation was in the middle of this transformation, still raised with the traditional values of our mothers, but already breathing the airs of freedom that arrived through 17 and Vogue magazines, the John Travolta films showing at the Plaza Theater, and the Fleetwood Mac songs playing on the radio. It was in this context of change that, at 19, in 1979, I met Julian Croft. He appeared in our lives on a Sunday afternoon after church, when the whole family had the custom of strolling down Patton Avenue to look at the shop windows and greet acquaintances. It was a sacred ritual of Asheville society. After the 11 o'clock service at Trinity Episcopal, everyone would walk down Patton Avenue towards Pack Square in a parade of hats, Sunday dresses, and polished shoes. Julian was standing in front of my father's store window, observing the Italian silks that Dad had received that week from New York. He was a tall man, about 26, with dark hair perfectly styled, wearing an impeccably cut gray suit, a burgundy silk tie, and leather shoes that shone like mirrors. He had that elegant bearing of men who knew how to dress, that erect posture that bespoke a good upbringing, and a discreet but charming smile. When my father approached to greet him, "You have magnificent textiles, sir," he said to my father, tipping his head in a gesture that showed perfect manners. "I'm Julian Croft. I've just moved to Asheville for work, and I'm looking for a trustworthy tailor to have some clothes made." My father, always proud of the quality of his products, invited Julian to see the store, and we, as was the custom of the time, accompanied them, because a respectable family did not separate during the Sunday stroll. Julian demonstrated an impressive knowledge of fabrics, distinguishing between different materials and speaking knowledgeably about cuts and styles. My father was so impressed that he invited him to have a drink with us at the Battery Park Hotel lounge on the corner of the block. It was at the Battery Park Hotel, while savoring gin and tonics and the hors d'oeuvres the place was famous for, that we got to know Julian Croft better. He told us he was an architect, a graduate of the University of Virginia, one of the most prestigious in the South, and that he had been transferred to Asheville by his firm to supervise the construction of a new corporate campus in the Research Triangle Park area. "It's an ambitious project," he explained, gesturing elegantly as he spoke. "A modern campus with designs from Europe that will create over 1,000 direct jobs. North Carolina is becoming a major hub for technology and business." My father was immediately interested in the conversation. As an experienced businessman, he was always alert to the business opportunities that changes in the region could bring. My mother, in turn, was impressed with Julian's refined manners, with the polite way he addressed her, with the respectful reverence he showed when talking about family and traditions. And I was simply enchanted. At 19, I had never met a man so sophisticated, so worldly, so different from the college boys I knew in Asheville. Julian spoke of business trips he had taken to New York, Chicago, even London. He quoted books on architecture and classic literature, demonstrating a worldview that I found fascinating. When we said goodbye that afternoon, Julian asked my father for permission to call on me during the week. "It would be an honor," he said, "to be able to spend time with such a distinguished and well-educated family while I am in Asheville." My father, always cautious but impressed by the young man's manners, replied, "You will always be welcome in our home, Mr. Croft. Men of your caliber are a credit to our city." That night, lying in the single bed in my room, which overlooked the backyard, I stayed awake late, thinking about that meeting. Julian Croft had something that deeply attracted me, an aura of mystery, of sophistication, of experiences I had never lived and wished to know. At 19, educated at a private academy and raised in the traditional values of Southern society, I dreamed of adventure, of a life different from the predictable routine I saw in the married women of my family. And Julian seemed to represent exactly that, the possibility of a broader, more interesting, more sophisticated life. Julian began to frequent our house regularly. He always came for dinner on Wednesdays and for lunch on Sundays after church. He brought discreet but refined gifts: flowers for my mother, premium bourbon for my father, poetry books for me. He talked about the political events of the time. We were in 1979, and the country was grappling with inflation and looking towards a new decade. "The Reagan era is going to bring stability to the country," he would say during dinners. "A strong America. The country needs to innovate, attract investment, build a solid economy." My father agreed completely. As a prosperous businessman, he looked favorably on a political shift that promised to fight inflation, deregulate industries, and promote development. "What the country needs is competent men in power," he would say. "Enough of bureaucracy and indecision." During these family dinners, I observed Julian with that admiration that only a 19-year-old girl can feel for a more experienced man. He knew how to behave at the table, knew which fork to use for each course, knew how to talk about serious subjects without being pedantic, knew how to praise my mother's cooking without exaggeration. Gradually, our family got used to his presence. My mother began to plan menus thinking about what he liked best. My father started consulting him on business matters and investments. My younger sisters were shy in his presence but clearly impressed by his elegance. And I was falling in love. Not the tumultuous teenage love that some of my friends experienced, but a more mature, more conscious passion. Julian represented everything I admired in a man: Intelligence, sophistication, ambition, elegance. He seemed to be someone with whom I could build an interesting life, travel the world, meet different places and people. The request to start dating came in October 1979 during a party my mother organized at our house. Julian had brought his guitar, and after I played a Debussy piece on the piano, he sang Fire and Rain by James Taylor with a melodious voice that moved everyone present. When the guests had left and the family had retired, Julian asked to speak with me on the front porch under the discreet supervision of my mother, who stayed in the living room pretending to read. "Isabella," he said, gently holding my hand, "these months spent with your family have been the happiest of my life. I would like to ask for permission to officially date you." My heart raced. It was the moment I had imagined so many times during sleepless nights. "I would be very honored," I replied, feeling my cheeks blush. "Then tomorrow, I will speak with your father to ask for his permission," he said, respectfully kissing my hand. "I want to do everything the right way, as a young lady of your quality deserves." Our official relationship began the next day. After Julian had a long conversation with my father in the store's office, Dad came out of the conversation satisfied. Julian had shown himself to be serious in his intentions, responsible in his plans, and respectful of family traditions. The months that followed were the most romantic of my life. Julian courted me the old-fashioned way, chaperoned walks through the botanical gardens, movie dates at the Plaza Theater with my sister Clara as a companion, family dinners on Sundays, romantic letters during the week. He wrote me beautiful letters on hotel letterhead with an elegant handwriting that showed a refined education. Letters that spoke of his feelings, his plans for the future, of how he imagined our life after marriage. "My dearest Isabella," one of them said, "every day away from you seems like an eternity. I work hard supervising the project, but my thoughts are always on the moments we spend together, on the smile that lights up your eyes when we talk about our dreams. I have ambitious plans for us. When I finish this project in North Carolina, the firm will transfer me to Atlanta, where there are greater opportunities for growth. Just imagine, the two of us in Atlanta, visiting theaters, museums, fine restaurants, living the cosmopolitan life that an intelligent and cultured young lady like you deserves." I read those letters dozens of times, dreaming of the future he painted in such vivid colors. Atlanta in the early 80s was synonymous with modernity, progress, opportunities. It was where the big corporations, the important theaters, the sophisticated stores were. For a girl from a smaller southern city, it was like dreaming of New York. During our 2.5-year relationship, Julian proved to be the perfect boyfriend, punctual, respectful, attentive. He never attempted any intimacy beyond kissing my hand or my cheek, behavior that my mother completely approved of. "He's a gentleman," she would say. "A man who respects boundaries is a man fit for marriage." I also learned some details about his personal life. He was from Richmond, Virginia, the only child of parents who had died in a car accident when he was in college. He had graduated with the savings his parents had left and an academic scholarship. He had no close relatives, but kept in touch with some distant cousins who lived in the state. "Sometimes I feel very lonely," he confessed to me one Sunday afternoon as we walked through the gardens. "Since I lost my parents, I haven't had a real family. That's why I value the affection you all have given me so much. It's as if I've found a new family." This vulnerability touched me deeply. Julian was not just the sophisticated and successful man I had first met. He was also someone who needed love, acceptance, a family to embrace him as a son. In December 1981, during the Christmas party at our house, Julian proposed to me. It was a magical moment. He knelt on the front lawn, where we had set up a traditional nativity scene, and took a small blue velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Isabella," he said, his voice emotional, "will you marry me?" Inside the box was a delicate but elegant diamond and sapphire ring that sparkled like a star under the light of the Christmas decorations. "Yes," I replied without hesitation, feeling tears of happiness stream down my face. "Yes, I want to marry you." The entire family, who had been discreetly peeking from the living room window, burst into applause and cheers. My mother cried with emotion. My father hugged Julian like a son. My sisters squealed with joy. That night, during Christmas dinner, Julian officially announced our engagement and revealed his plans for the future. The architectural project would be completed in May 1982, and soon after, he would be transferred to Atlanta, where he would take a senior partner position in a major architectural firm. "I would like to marry Isabella before the transfer," he said, looking respectfully at my father, "so we can start our life in Atlanta as husband and wife." My father, who by then already considered Julian a son, gave his blessing immediately. "It will be an honor to have you as a son-in-law," he said. Isabella could not have chosen a better man. The wedding was set for May 15, 1982, a date Julian chose because it would be exactly 1 week after the completion of the project. "I want to get married with a clear mind," he explained, "with no professional worries, so I can dedicate myself entirely to our honeymoon." The months of preparations were intense and exciting. My mother transformed into a master organizer, taking care of every detail of the ceremony and the party. We ordered the dress from a boutique in Charlotte, a model inspired by the gowns of European princesses, with a 6-foot train and hand embroidery. Julian actively participated in the preparations, always attentive and helpful. He helped choose the flowers, white roses and lilies of the valley, suggested the party menu, and recommended a photographer he had met in Charlotte. During these months, our relationship deepened even more. Julian began to have dinner with us every Wednesday and Friday, in addition to the traditional Sundays. He started giving me small gifts that showed his attention to my tastes: books by authors I mentioned, classical music records, French perfumes he ordered from New York. "I'm looking forward to our honeymoon," he told me one April evening as we walked in the garden after dinner. "I've booked a suite at the Warwick Hotel in New York City. 2 weeks just for us, exploring the city, going to Broadway shows, restaurants, museums. It will be unforgettable." The Warwick was one of the most luxurious hotels in the country, where international artists, important politicians, and millionaire businessmen stayed. For a girl from Asheville, it was like dreaming of a fairy tale. "And after that," he continued, "we'll go to Atlanta to start our new life. I've already leased an apartment in a modern building in Buckhead, an elegant neighborhood where executives from large companies live. You'll love the cosmopolitan life of the capital." Everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed like a dream coming true. The wedding ceremony took place at Trinity Episcopal Church on a sunny May morning that seemed to have been blessed by God, especially for us. The church was packed, with over 200 guests, including all of Asheville society, family friends, my father's business colleagues, and even the city's mayor and his wife. I remember every detail of that day as if it were yesterday. The scent of the lilies decorating the altar, the sound of the organ playing Mendelssohn's Wedding March, the weight of the dress that seemed to carry not just yards of fabric, but all the dreams and hopes I had placed in that moment. As I walked towards the altar, arm in arm with my father, I saw Julian waiting for me with that smile I had grown to love. He looked impeccable in his rented tuxedo, his hair perfectly combed, his posture erect, emanating confidence and happiness. "Do you take Julian Croft as your lawfully wedded husband, to love and to honor, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, till death do you part?" "I do," I replied with a firm voice, looking directly into the eyes of the man I believed would be my companion for life. The reception was magnificent, held in the ballroom of the Asheville Country Club, decorated with white and gold flowers, with a band that played swing standards and popular music all night long. The wedding cake had 4 tiers, and was made by the most refined bakery in the city. Julian was the perfect groom throughout the party. He danced the opening dance with me to the sound of Endless Love, personally greeted all the guests, talked business and politics with the important men, and complimented the ladies of society with his characteristic politeness. During the party, I watched how he moved with ease among all social groups. He spoke with the mayor about the city's economic development, chatted with my father about business opportunities, praised my mother for the flawless organization of the ceremony, It was as if he were born for that environment, as if he were truly a part of our society. Around 11 p.m., when the party was in full swing, Julian leaned in and whispered in my ear, "How about we head to the hotel, my wife? It's been a long day, and we have an early flight to New York tomorrow." My wife. Those two words sounded like music to my ears. I was finally the wife of the man I loved. I had finally achieved the life I had always dreamed of. We said goodbye to the guests amidst a shower of rice and rose petals and got into the Cadillac convertible that Julian had rented, especially for the occasion, a luxurious car that drew admiration from everyone present. I was still in my wedding dress, he in his tuxedo, driving into the night towards the Grove Park Inn, where we would spend our first married night before flying to New York. The hotel suite was beautiful: antique furniture, velvet curtains, a king-sized bed with an embroidered bedspread, chilled champagne on a side table. Julian had taken care of every detail to make our first night unforgettable. "My dear wife," he said, embracing me gently, "you are beautiful. You are the most beautiful woman in the world." We spent our first night as husband and wife talking about the future, about our plans for Atlanta, about the family we wanted to have. Julian was affectionate and respectful, exactly as I had expected him to be. Falling asleep in the arms of the man I loved, after months of a respectful and chaste relationship, was one of the most complete feelings of my life. It was the last time I was completely happy. Looking back now, I realized there had been small signs I chose to ignore. The way Julian never invited us to visit his workplace, how he always deflected questions about his colleagues, the fact that he carried so little luggage for someone supposedly relocating permanently. But love, especially young love, has a way of making us blind to inconvenient truths. I woke up the next morning, Sunday, May 16, 1982, around 8 o'clock. We were now in our suite at the Grove Park Inn in Asheville. The sun streamed through the half-open curtains, the sounds of the city hummed outside, and I felt like the most fulfilled woman in the world. I was married, I was loved, and I had a life full of possibilities ahead of me, alongside the perfect man. I reached out my arm to touch Julian, but I only found the empty pillow. "Julian?" I called out softly, imagining he had gone to the bathroom. Silence. I got out of bed, still wearing the white silk nightgown my mother had chosen, especially for my wedding night, and looked for him in the suite's bathroom. Empty. "Julian?" I called out louder, going into the suite's small living room. Nothing. It was then that I noticed his clothes were no longer there. His suitcase had disappeared. His shaving and toiletries were no longer in the bathroom. I ran to the closet where he had put his clothes the night before. Empty. I ran to the table where he had left his wallet, his watch, the keys to the rental car. Empty. Everything belonging to Julian Croft, my husband of less than 24 hours, had simply vanished, as if he had never existed. I stood there, in the middle of that hotel suite, still in my wedding nightgown, trying to process what was happening. My brain simply refused to accept the reality before my eyes. Julian couldn't have disappeared. Men don't just disappear like that, without explanation, the day after their wedding. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe he had gone out to buy me flowers. Maybe he had gone to get a special breakfast. Maybe he had received an urgent call from work and had to resolve some emergency before we started our honeymoon. Anything but abandonment, but betrayal, but disappearance. I sat on the edge of the bed, still warm from his body, and waited. I waited for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The sun rose higher in the sky, the hotel's activity increased, the voices of guests echoed in the hallways, and still no Julian. Around 10 a.m., when I could no longer convince myself he would return, I went down to the hotel reception. I was still in my nightgown, with just a robe over it, my hair undone, but I didn't care about my appearance. I needed to understand what was happening. "Please," I said to the receptionist, a middle-aged man who looked at me with a mixture of surprise and pity. "My husband went out early and hasn't returned. Did you see him leave?" "Are you the guest from Suite 1237? He asked, consulting a computer screen. "Yes, I'm Isabella. Isabella Croft," I replied, pronouncing my new last name for the first time with a strange feeling in my mouth. "Ah, yes. Your husband checked out around 5 a.m. He said you would be coming down later." "Checked out? 5 a.m.? While I was sleeping peacefully beside him, dreaming of our honeymoon in New York, Julian was silently packing his bags, planning his escape. "Did he leave a message?" I asked, my voice starting to tremble. "No, madam. He just paid the bill and left." I went back to the room in a kind of trance. I sat in the armchair where Julian had placed his jacket the night before and tried to understand. I tried to find an explanation that made sense, that would turn this nightmare into a situation with a solution. Maybe he had received urgent news about a sick relative. Maybe an emergency at work required his immediate presence. Maybe he would come back later that day, or send a telegram explaining everything, or call the hotel. I stayed in the room until 6 p.m., waiting for a call that never came, an explanation that never arrived, a return that never happened. At 7 p.m., the room's phone finally rang. I ran to answer it, my heart pounding, certain it was Julian with an explanation for everything. "Hello? Isabella, my dear? How's the honeymoon?" It was my mother, calling from Asheville to check in. That's when I broke down. I started crying on the phone, choked sobs that came from my soul, jumbled words that my mother had trouble understanding. "Calm down, honey, calm down. What's happening?" "Mom," I managed to say between tears. Julian disappeared." "What do you mean, disappeared?" "He's not here. I woke up this morning and he was gone. He took all his things. He checked out of the hotel at 5 a.m. without waking me." The silence on the other end of the line lasted an eternity. "Honey," my mother finally said, her voice controlled but clearly shaken, "you stay right there. We are on our way over now." "But Mom, what if he comes back? What if?" "Isabella, listen carefully to what I'm about to say. A man who abandons his wife the day after the wedding doesn't come back. He never comes back. You stay in the room, order room service, and wait for us." Less than an hour later, my parents arrived at the Grove Park Inn. They found a shattered daughter, still unable to fully accept the reality of the abandonment. My father, a practical and decisive man, immediately took charge while my mother rushed to embrace me. "First thing," he said, his voice firm and steady, "we're taking you home and telling the family what happened. Second, we're going to find this son of a bitch and find out what he's up to. Third, we're going to resolve this situation legally." On the way back to our house in Biltmore Forest, as I cried silently in the back seat of their car, they began to ask me questions I hadn't asked myself. "Do you know his family in Richmond?" my father asked. He said he didn't have a family, that his parents died in an accident. "And friends? Co-workers?" "Only the ones we met in Asheville, from the firm where he works." "And where exactly does he work?" It was then that I realized something terrible. I didn't know. I knew he supervised the construction of a corporate campus, but I had never asked the name of the firm. I had never visited his workplace. I had never met any of his colleagues beyond those we met casually. I don't know exactly," I admitted, feeling a new wave of despair. We arrived in Asheville the next morning. Our house, which 2 days earlier had been a scene of celebration and joy, now seemed heavy with a profound sadness. The wedding flowers were still scattered around the living room, the gifts were still piled on the dining table, the congratulatory cards were still displayed on the mantel. My mother made me some tea and took me to my old bedroom, the same room where I had dreamed of my future with Julian, where I had chosen my honeymoon clothes, where I had spent my last night as Isabella Vance. "Honey," she said, tucking me into bed as if I were a child, "I know this is hard, but you have to be strong. Tomorrow, your father will investigate this whole story, and we will find out what really happened." The next morning, my father began an investigation that would reveal truths even more painful than the abandonment itself. First, he called contacts in the Research Triangle Park to ask about the corporate campus where Julian supposedly worked. He talked to developers, contractors, supervisors. No one knew any Julian Croft. There was no such project being led by a new architect from Richmond. There was no firm that had hired an architect of that name in the last 3 years. Then, he called the University of Virginia to verify if Julian had really graduated from there. The registrar's office confirmed that there had never been a student named Julian Croft in their records. Next, he investigated the documents Julian had presented at the time of our engagement: driver's license, birth certificate, social security card, all fake. Well-made forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. "Isabella," my father told me one afternoon after a week of investigations, "the man you married doesn't exist. Julian Croft is a completely fabricated identity." I was sitting on our porch, still in mourning for the wedding that had lasted a day, trying to process information that seemed to come from a thriller novel. "But Dad, he lived in Asheville for almost 3 years. Everyone knew him. He visited our house, our church." "He played a character for 3 years," my father replied, "and he played it very well, but nothing he told us about himself was true." It was at that moment that the most devastating discovery of all arrived. Mr. Davison, the family lawyer and a friend of my father's, had used his contacts to investigate the case more deeply. One afternoon in June 1982, he showed up at our house with information that would forever change my understanding of what had happened. "Harrison," he said to my father, "I found something you need to know, and it's not going to be easy to hear." We gathered in the living room. Me, my parents, Mr. Davison, and my brother Harry, who had come specially to support us. Through my contacts at the county clerk's office in Charlotte, Mr. Davison began, "I discovered that on the same day Isabella married Julian Croft, there was another wedding registered in his name." I felt the world spin around me. Another wedding? Yes. At 11 a.m. on May 15, 1982, Julian Croft married Isabella Vance in Asheville. At 4 p.m., on the same day, the same Julian Croft married a woman named Caroline Segal in Charlotte. The silence that followed was sepulchral. "He married twice on the same day?" my mother asked in disbelief. "Exactly. And from the documentation I obtained, his marriage to Caroline Segal appears to be the real one. It was in that wedding that he used legitimate documents. It was in that wedding that he presented real family and friends. So my marriage to him," I started to say, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Your marriage to him was a complete farce," Mr. Davison confirmed gently. "Fake documents, fake identity, a ceremony with no legal value. But Reverend Michael performed the ceremony at Trinity Episcopal. How can it have no legal value?" "Because the documents presented were false. Technically, the Reverend was deceived too. He believed he was officiating a legitimate wedding, but in reality, he was an unwitting accomplice to a sham." It took me a few minutes to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. Not only had Julian abandoned me the day after the wedding, he had never actually married me. Our ceremony, our party, our wedding night had all been an elaborate performance so he could marry another woman on the same day. "Who is this Caroline Segal?" I finally asked. "The daughter of a wealthy family from Charlotte, owners of a large textile manufacturing company. From what I could gather, she and Julian met about 3 years ago, around the same time he appeared in Asheville." The timeline began to make sense. Julian hadn't chosen Asheville at random to carry out his scam. He had chosen our city because it was close enough to Charlotte for him to maintain 2 simultaneous relationships, but far enough that the 2 families would never meet. "For 3 years," Mr. Davison continued, "he maintained 2 parallel engagements, 2 families believing he was their son-in-law, 2 young women believing they were loved. And in the end, he married both on the same day, probably to steal money from both families at the same time." "Steal money?" "Isabella," my father said gently, "do you remember the money I lent Julian last week for him to advance some expenses for the move to Atlanta?" I remembered. Julian had asked for money with a convincing story about needing to pay a deposit on the apartment in Buckhead, moving expenses for our things, transfer fees at the firm. Dad had given him the money without hesitation. It was for his dear son-in-law to facilitate our new life in Atlanta. The total amount from our family was $20,000, a fortune at the time. "And he probably stole at least the same amount from the Segal family," Mr. Davison added. "He's a professional con man, Isabella. He studied our 2 families," identified weak points, created specific characters for each situation, and executed an elaborate plan for 3 years. But why marry me if he was going to be with the other one? Because marrying you was also part of the scam. He probably planned to steal more money after the wedding inheritances, jewelry, family investments. The abandonment might have happened because something went wrong, or because he got more money from the Siegel family than he expected to get from ours. The conversation went on for hours. Mr. Davison explained legal details. My father planned actions to try to recover the stolen money. My mother tried to console me. But I was in a state of shock, trying to mentally reconstruct the last 3 years of my life. Every tender moment with Julian had been calculated. Every declaration of love had been rehearsed. Every plan for the future had been a lie. Every kiss, every hug, every promise had all been an elaborate performance by a consummate actor playing the role of the perfect fiancé. Is there any chance of finding him? I asked. Very small, mister. Davison answered honestly. Men like this are experts at disappearing. He's probably already assumed a new identity, is already in another city, maybe already running the same scam on another family. And the woman, this Caroline? Did she disappear too? According to my contacts in Charlotte, she and her husband left for a honeymoon in the Caribbean on May 16th and never came back. Her family is as desperate as you are. So, Caroline had also been abandoned. Maybe she had woken up one morning in the Caribbean to find her husband had disappeared, just as I had in New York. We were 2 women destroyed by the same man, 2 victims of the same elaborate scam. What do I do now? I asked, feeling completely lost. Now, you recover, my mother said, hugging me. You are young, you are smart, you are beautiful. You will get over this, and you will find a man who truly loves you. But how will I ever trust anyone again? How will I know if it's real? It was a question that would haunt me for years. How to distinguish true love from a convincing performance. How to trust beautiful words after being deceived by the most beautiful words. How to believe in promises after living on a foundation of empty promises. Mr. Davison filed a formal complaint with the police, but as expected, it never went anywhere. Julian Croft had been too careful, had planned his escape with military precision. He left no traces, made no mistakes that could be tracked. The money was never recovered. The jewelry he had given me during our relationship, which we discovered were all fake, had no value. Even the engagement ring was cheap costume jewelry disguised as an expensive gem. In the months that followed, our family faced not only the pain of betrayal but also the social shame the scandal brought. In the Asheville of the 1980s, a small city where everyone knew everyone, it was impossible to hide what had happened. People talked, speculated about what had really occurred. Some felt pity, others had a morbid curiosity. Some even suggested our family was to blame for not investigating the fiancé better. Isabella was very naive. I would hear them whisper at the country club. A family like the Vances should have been suspicious of a man who appeared out of nowhere. They say he stole a fortune from them, they commented at the pharmacy. Serves them right for being so trusting. Poor girl, they whispered at the salon. It'll be hard for her to find another husband now. Men don't like a woman with that kind of baggage. These conversations hurt me deeply, but they also strengthened me in a strange way. They made me realize I couldn't spend the rest of my life as a victim, lamenting what I had lost. I needed to find a way to rebuild my life with dignity. It was my sister Clara who gave me the first push out of my depression. Isabella, she said one afternoon, finding me crying in my room. You're 22 years old. Your life isn't over because some scoundrel tricked you. In fact, your life is just beginning. How can you say that? I've been completely humiliated. Everyone in town knows I was abandoned the day after my wedding. So what? Would you rather spend the rest of your life hiding here at home, or would you rather show everyone that Isabella Vance is stronger than any con man? Clara was right. I could choose to be forever defined by the betrayal I had suffered, or I could choose to be defined by how I recovered from it. I started slowly. First, I went back to attending church, ignoring the curious stares and the conversations that stopped when I passed. Then, I started helping my father at the store, learning about business, about dealing with suppliers, about managing staff. "You have a knack for this," Dad said after a few weeks. "Maybe you should consider taking on a part of the business officially." It was a revolutionary suggestion for the time. Women of our social class didn't typically dive into the family business that way, didn't take on major commercial responsibilities. But our family had learned in the most painful way possible that traditions don't always protect you from the cruelties of the world. "What do you think, Isabella?" my mother asked during dinner. "Would you like to work officially at the store?" "I would," I replied, surprised by my own conviction. "I think it would be good to have something of my own to do, something that gives me independence." And so, at 22, I became the first woman in the Vance family to officially take a management role in the family business. I started by taking care of merchandising and store displays, then moved on to customer relations, and finally to buying and negotiating with vendors. I discovered I had a talent for business. I had an eye for trends, an intuition for what the women of Asheville wanted to buy, and a skill for negotiating prices and terms. In 2 years, I was practically managing half the store. Work saved me in many ways. It gave me purpose, it gave me financial independence, it gave me self-esteem. Most importantly, it gave me a new identity that wasn't tied to what had happened with Julian. Now, I was no longer the girl who was abandoned the day after her wedding. I was Isabella Vance, from Vance's department store, who is modernizing retail in Asheville. But even with work, even with the gradual recovery of my self-esteem, the emotional wound took much longer to heal. The years passed. 1983, 1984, 1985. The country was in the midst of the Reagan boom. The economy was growing, cities were modernizing, and Asheville was gaining a cosmopolitan air with new restaurants, new neighborhoods, new opportunities. I grew during those years too. Not just professional, your store prospered and expanded, opening a second branch in a new shopping center, but emotionally. I learned to rebuild my trust, little by little, like someone rebuilding a shattered house, brick by brick. There were suitors, of course. Men interested in the Vance girl who had become a prosperous and independent businesswoman. Some were sincere, others clearly interested in the family's social and financial position. But I had developed a deep mistrust of romantic declarations, an almost obsessive need to investigate every detail of any man's life who approached me. "Isabella, you can't spend your whole life distrusting everyone," my sister Clara would often tell me. She had married a lawyer from a traditional local family in 1984 and was always encouraging me to give love another chance. "Yes, I can," I would reply. "I'd rather be alone than be deceived again." And for a long time, I truly believed that. I had built a satisfying life, a fulfilling job, financial independence, respect in the community. Why complicate it with relationships that could be fake? But fate, as always, has its own plans. In September 1987, 5 years after my sham wedding, something happened that would completely change my perspective on what had happened to me. I was in Charlotte on business, attending a trade show for retailers. One Thursday afternoon, I stopped for a coffee at a cafe in Uptown. I was sitting at a corner table, reviewing my purchase orders for the day, when a female voice beside me said, "Excuse me, aren't you Isabella Vance from Asheville?" I looked up and saw a woman of about 30, elegantly dressed, with well-kept blonde hair and a face that, though beautiful, carried an expression of deep sadness. There was something familiar about her, but I couldn't place it. "Yes, I am," I replied cautiously. "My name is Caroline Segal," she said, and the world stopped around me. Caroline Segal. The other woman. The woman who had married Julian Croft on the same day as me. Could I sit for a moment?" she asked with a hesitant voice. "I know this must be strange, but I really need to talk to you." I gestured for her to sit, my heart pounding. For 5 years, I had imagined what it would be like to meet this woman. I had created versions of her in my head, sometimes as a victim, like me, sometimes as Julian's accomplice, sometimes as the woman truly loved, for whom I had been abandoned. "How did you find me?" I asked. "I didn't. It was a coincidence. I recognized you." "Why?" "Because he had a photograph of you. A photograph of me? Several, actually. From your wedding, your engagement, of you with your family. They were among the things he forgot when he disappeared. Caroline ordered a coffee, and we sat in silence for a few minutes, two women who had been united by the same tragedy, not knowing how to start a conversation we both needed to have. He abandoned you too? I finally asked. 3 days after the wedding, she replied with a bitterness I recognized perfectly. I woke up one morning in our hotel in St. Bart's, and he was gone. He took all the money I had brought for the honeymoon, the jewelry my mother gave me as a wedding present, even the Porsche my father had bought for us. How much money? $30,000, plus the jewelry, which was worth at least another $20,000. $50,000. Added to the $20,000 he had stolen from my family, that was $70,000. A fortune, capable of buying several houses or starting a prosperous business. And you never heard from him again? Never again. My family hired private detectives, the police investigated, but he just vanished as if he had never existed. Caroline told me her version of the story, and the similarities to my experience were frightening. Julian had appeared in her life 3 years before the wedding, presenting himself as a successful architect, son of a traditional family, with ambitious plans for the future. He had won the trust of her parents in the same way he had won my family's, with charm, education, and convincing stories about his life and business. For 3 years, she said, nervously stirring her coffee cup. He was the perfect fiancé. Attentive, caring, respectful. My parents adored him. I was completely in love. And you never suspected anything? Never. He was too convincing. He had an answer for everything, an explanation for anything that seemed strange. I believed every word. Just as I had believed. Caroline, I asked, did you know he was engaged to someone else at the same time? I knew, she replied, surprising me. But not in the way you think. What do you mean? He told me he had been engaged to a girl from Asheville, but that the engagement had ended due to family differences. He said it had been a very painful experience for him, which was why it took him a while to open up to a new love. The man's audacity knew no bounds. He had used our supposed breakup as a way to gain Caroline's sympathy, to present himself as the victim of a failed love. He even showed me pictures of you, she continued. He said he kept them as a memory of a difficult time in his life, but that now he had found true love with me. And the wedding? Did he tell you he was going to marry me on the same day? Never. I only found that out later, when my family investigated. That's when we understood we had been victims of a much more elaborate scam than we imagined. We talked for over 2 hours in that cafe. Caroline told me details of her life that strangely mirrored mine. A traditional family, a conservative upbringing, dreams of a different, more sophisticated life. She too had been attracted to Julian's worldliness, to the promise of a more cosmopolitan and interesting life. The worst part, she said at one point, wasn't losing the money or the jewelry. It was discovering that the man I was in love with simply didn't exist. That every tender moment had been calculated, every declaration of love had been rehearsed. I understand perfectly, I replied. For years, I wondered if there was anything genuine in his feelings, if at any point he had actually felt something for me. And did you come to a conclusion? I did. Men like Julian are incapable of loving anything but their own self-interest. We aren't people to them. We are just opportunities. Caroline agreed, nodding sadly. What hurt me the most, she said, was imagining that he had left me to be with another woman, that he had chosen between us, and I had lost. But now we know he didn't choose anyone. He used both of us and then discarded both of us. In a way, that hurts less. At least I wasn't rejected in favor of someone else. I was just exploited. Before we parted, Caroline asked me a question that would haunt me for the next few months. Isabella, have you ever wondered how many other women have gone through what we went through? How many other Isabellas and Carolines are there, scattered across the country? The question haunted me because I had never thought about it. I had always seen our situation as something isolated, unique. But men like Julian don't pull off such an elaborate scam just once. They perfect their techniques, repeat their formulas, move from city to city, leaving a trail of broken hearts and robbed families. He must have other identities, Caroline continued, other names, other stories, other families who believe they have a wonderful son-in-law. We said goodbye that afternoon, exchanging addresses and promising to keep in touch. It was strange, but talking to Caroline had given me a sense of relief I didn't expect. For 5 years, I had carried the weight of humiliation and betrayal alone. Knowing I wasn't alone, that there was someone else who understood exactly what I had felt, was comforting in a peculiar way. I returned to Asheville with my head buzzing with questions. Was Julian still running scams? Were there other victims? Was there any way to track him, to stop him, to bring him to justice? For the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about these possibilities. I talked obsessively with my family about it, speculated about possible whereabouts, imagined ways to investigate. It was my brother, Harry, who brought up the idea that would change everything. "Isabella," he said one night during dinner, "have you ever thought about hiring a private investigator? Not to get the money back, we've already lost that, but to find out if he's still active, if there are other victims." "What for? What difference would it make?" "Maybe none. But maybe we could warn other families, prevent other women from going through what you went through." The idea intrigued me. I hadn't thought about seeking Julian for revenge or to recover the lost money, but the possibility of preventing other women from falling victim to the same scam that made sense. "Do you know a reliable PI?" "I know a retired police detective who opened an investigation agency in Charlotte, Wayne Casey. He mainly works on missing persons and fraud cases." 2 weeks later, I was in Wayne Casey's office, a man of about 50, with graying hair and a serious but kind demeanor, who listened to my whole story without showing any surprise. "Cases like yours are more common than you might imagine, ma'am," he said when I finished. "Romance scammers are a plague all over the country, and men like this Julian tend to be repeat offenders." "Do you think he's still active?" "Almost certainly. A scam that netted over $70,000 is too tempting to abandon. He's probably perfected his techniques and is running the same scheme in other cities." Wayne explained how the investigation would work. He would use his contacts in law enforcement and public records databases to track the use of the name Julian Croft and other aliases in other states. He would also investigate similar patterns. Men who presented themselves as architects or engineers, who courted young women from wealthy families, who carried out marriage scams. "It will take time," he warned me, "and we might not find anything. Men like this are experts at disappearing." "How long?" "A few months, maybe a year. It depends on luck and persistence." I hired Wayne Casey in October 1987. Over the following months, he sent me monthly reports on the investigation's progress. At first, they were frustrating reports. Leads that went nowhere, names that didn't correspond to real people, trails that went cold before leading anywhere. But in March 1988, exactly 6 years after my sham wedding, Wayne called me with news that would make my blood run cold. "Isabella," he said, "I found him." "You found Julian? Where?" "In Savannah, Georgia. Only now he's calling himself Robert Martin, and he's engaged to a young lady from the high society there." I felt a mix of anger, satisfaction, and concern. "The same story?" "Exactly the same. Successful developer, traditional family, ambitious plans. He's been courting the daughter of a prosperous shipping magnate for about a year and a half. And the wedding is set for June, 3 months from now." 3 months. A young woman in Savannah was 3 months away from going through the same humiliation that Caroline and I had. A family was about to be robbed in the same way our families had been. What can we do? Officially, nothing. We don't have jurisdiction in Georgia. We don't have concrete proof that Robert Martin is the same person as Julian Croft. Unofficially, Wayne paused before answering, we could warn the family. Tell them our side of the story. Let them decide if they want to investigate or not. How? You could write a letter. Tell your story. Warn them about the similarities. Suggest they investigate the fiancé's past before the wedding. The idea terrified and thrilled me at the same time. How could I write such a letter? How could I convince a family that didn't know me that their beloved future son-in-law was a con man? How could I do it without sounding like a bitter woman making up stories? Will they believe a letter from a stranger? Maybe not. But if the letter is well written, if it contains specific details that only someone who really knew this man could know, maybe it will raise enough suspicion for them to investigate. I spent a whole week crafting that letter. I wrote, deleted, rewrote, corrected, modified. How to tell such a bizarre story in a convincing way. How to warn of a danger without sounding paranoid. In the end, I opted for simplicity and total honesty. I told my story without omitting any embarrassing details. I included information about Caroline to show it wasn't an isolated case and suggested specific ways to verify the fiancé's identity and past. The letter was 6 typewritten pages. I included copies of the fake documents Julian had used, photographs of him taken during our engagement, and even Caroline's contact information so they could confirm my version of events. Wayne took on the task of delivering the letter personally to the bride's father, a businessman named Arthur Pierce, owner of a shipping company in Savannah. 2 weeks later, we received the response. Mr. Pierce had not only believed the letter, but had hired his own investigators to verify the information. In a week, they confirmed that Robert Martin was indeed Julian Croft, that all the documents presented were fake, and that there were at least 3 other women in different states who had been victims of similar scams in recent years. The wedding has been called off, Wayne informed me by phone, and Mr. Pierce wants to talk to you. To me? What for? He wants to propose a partnership. He wants to help find other victims and warn other families. He said that men like Julian only stop when they are publicly exposed. The conversation with Mr. Pierce opened up a new perspective on the whole situation. He wasn't just interested in protecting his own family. He wanted to turn our experience into a crusade against romance scammers. Miss Vance, he told me on a long-distance call, your letter saved my daughter from a tragedy. Now I want to help save other daughters from other families. How? By setting up a network of information, cataloging similar cases, alerting authorities, creating a warning system for families who might be at risk. It was an ambitious idea for the time. This was before the internet made sharing information easy, but Mr. Pierce had business contacts in several cities, Wayne had law enforcement contacts in several states, and I had a deep motivation to prevent other women from going through what I had gone through. And so, our small, informal network to combat romance scammers was born an unlikely partnership between a businesswoman from Asheville, a businessman from Savannah, and a private investigator from Charlotte, united by the determination to stop Julian Croft, or whatever his real name was, from continuing to destroy lives. Our informal network for combating romance scammers worked better than any of us expected. Over the next 2 years, between 1,988 and 1,990, we managed to track Julian, who was now using different identities, through at least 4 different states. After the episode in Savannah, where we managed to prevent the wedding to Mr. Pierce's daughter, Julian disappeared for a few months. Wayne Casey believed he had been spooked by the near miss and was reorganizing his strategies. Men like this are like water, Wayne explained to me during a meeting in Charlotte. When they meet resistance in one direction, they change course, but they don't stop flowing. And he was right. In August 1988, we received information that a man with physical characteristics identical to Julian's was courting a young woman in Charleston, South Carolina, introducing himself as Charles Bishop, an entrepreneur in the import-export business. This time, we didn't wait. Wayne traveled immediately to Charleston with copies of the photographs we had of Julian and complete documentation of his previous scams. In less than a week, he had confirmed that Charles Bishop was indeed our fugitive. The girl's family, the Middletons, prominent local figures, initially resisted our warnings. The fiancé had won not only the daughter's trust but also that of the family patriarch, who saw Charles as an ideal son-in-law to expand the family business. It took Wayne presenting irrefutable photographic evidence and putting the patriarch in direct contact with me by phone for them to finally believe the truth. Miss Vance, said Mr. Middleton during our phone conversation, Are you absolutely certain that this man is the same one who was engaged to you? I am, sir. And I am also certain that he is planning to defraud your family in the same way he defrauded mine. But he has documents, references. All fake. He's an expert in document forgery. Please, investigate on your own. Don't just take my word for it. Mr. Middleton hired his own investigators and, as we expected, discovered that Charles Bishop was a completely fabricated identity. Once again, we managed to prevent a sham wedding just weeks before the ceremony. But this time, Julian didn't disappear silently as he had in Savannah. Perhaps because he had already invested a lot of time and money in the Charleston scam, or perhaps because he was feeling cornered, he reacted aggressively. 3 days after the wedding was called off, I received a call that chilled my blood. Isabella Vance? Yes? You should stop meddling where you're not wanted. It was Julian's voice, deeper than I remembered, filled with anger, but unmistakably his. Julian? I asked, my heart racing. You're playing with fire, Isabella. I know where you live. I know where your family works. It would be a shame if something happened to them because of your insistence on persecuting me. The call lasted only a minute, but it was enough to leave me terrified. Julian wasn't just running from us, he was actively threatening us. I reported the threat immediately to Wayne and the Asheville police. On their recommendation, our family reinforced the security of our house and store, and I spent a few weeks avoiding going out alone. He's feeling cornered, Wayne explained. This is good and bad at the same time. Good because it means we're succeeding in disrupting his plans. Bad because desperate men can do reckless things. The threats scared me, but they also strengthened me in a strange way. For 6 years since my sham wedding, I had felt like Julian's victim. Now, for the first time, I was in the position of the hunter, not the prey, and he was afraid of me. I'm not stopping, I told Wayne in a meeting after the threats. If we stop now, he will continue to destroy other families and will feel invincible. Are you sure? The threats seemed serious. I am, but we'll have to be more careful, and maybe it's time to officially involve the authorities. Until then, our network had operated informally. We warned families, shared information, prevented weddings, but always through unofficial channels. Now, with the explicit threats, Wayne suggested we take all our documentation to the FBI. Wire fraud, interstate fraud, telephone threats, these are all federal crimes, he explained. And since he's operating in several states, the FBI has full jurisdiction. In September 1988, we presented ourselves at the FBI field office in Charlotte with a complete dossier on Julian Croft, Robert Martin, Charles Bishop, fake documents, photographs, victim testimonies, evidence of scams in 4 different states. The special agent in charge, Agent Davies, was impressed with the quality of the investigation we had conducted informally. You've done a better job than many professional investigators, he said, flipping through our dossier. With this evidence, I can open an official inquiry and request federal arrest warrants. And the threats? I asked. Those are also a crime. I'll include them in the inquiry. If we can arrest him, he'll answer for everything at once. The official investigation brought resources our informal network didn't have. The FBI was able to track bank accounts, analyze documents with specialized equipment, and cross-reference information between different states with much greater efficiency. In 3 months, they confirmed that Julian had used at least 7 different identities in the last 10 years, carrying out romance scams on at least 9 families across the country. The total amount stolen exceeded $250,000, a fortune. We are dealing with a professional criminal. Agent Davies informed me during a meeting in December 1988. This man has made a profession out of these scams. He has an organization, contacts, a support network. A support network? People who help him create false identities, who provide documents, who give references. He doesn't work alone. The discovery that Julian was part of a larger criminal organization was both frightening and enlightening. It explained how he obtained such convincing fake documents, how he got references that seemed legitimate, how he managed to disappear so completely after each scam. The official investigation also revealed something that shocked me deeply. Julian is married. Married legally, Agent Davies clarified. To a woman in Texas for over 15 years, they have 2 teenage children. He has a family? He does. And interestingly, the legal wife knows nothing. She believes her husband works as a sales representative and travels a lot for work. He maintains 2 completely separate lives. The existence of a legal wife and children added an extra layer of complexity to Julian's personality. He wasn't just a lone con man driven by greed. He was a man who had created an elaborate double life, supporting one family with the money stolen from other families. Does his wife know he marries other women? Apparently not. When our agents approached her, she was in shock. She said her husband had always been a respectable man, a good father, a good provider. The irony was cruel. While Julian was destroying families all over the country, he himself maintained a traditional family in Texas, playing the role of an exemplary husband with the money from his scams. The federal investigation progressed rapidly during the first half of 1989. Arrest warrants were issued. Alerts were sent to police departments in all states. Photographs of Julian were distributed to county clerks' offices. In June 1989, we received the news we had been waiting for over a year. We got him. Agent Davies telephoned me on a Monday morning. Julian Croft, or whatever his name is, was arrested yesterday in Palm Beach, Florida, trying to marry the daughter of a real estate mogul. I felt a mix of relief, satisfaction, and a strange melancholy. For 7 years, Julian had been a constant presence in my life, first as a beloved fiancé, then as a ghost that haunted me, and finally as a fugitive I was pursuing. Now, suddenly, that phase had come to an end. How was the arrest? He was at the courthouse, providing fake documents for the marriage license when our agents surrounded him. He didn't resist. In fact, when he realized he'd been caught, he seemed almost relieved. Relieved? That's what the agents reported. As if he was tired of running. Julian was brought to Charlotte, where he would be tried for the federal crimes. As the main victim and witness, I was summoned to testify, and, if I wished, to confront him personally. The decision to see him again was one of the most difficult of my life. For 7 years, I had imagined this moment dozens of times. Sometimes I dreamed of a dramatic confrontation where I would scream all my accumulated grievances. Other times, I imagined a cold, distant encounter where I would demonstrate how I had overcome the betrayal. I never imagined that when the moment came, I would feel mostly curiosity. The meeting took place in an interview room at the federal building, with Agent Davies, Wayne Casey, and 2 clerks present. Julian was in handcuffs, wearing a gray prison jumpsuit, a far cry from the elegant man I had known. He had aged visibly. His hair, once impeccably combed, was gray and disheveled. His face, once always clean-shaven, showed stubble. But his eyes were still the same, intelligent, calculating, capable of charm even in a desperate situation. "Isabella," he said when he saw me enter the room. "You look well. You're beautiful." Even in prison, even confronted with irrefutable evidence of his crimes, Julian tried to use charm as a defense mechanism. "Julian?" I replied, surprised with the calm in my own voice. "Or should I call you by another name?" He smiled, that same smile that had won me over on a Sunday afternoon in Asheville. "My real name is Robert Sterling," he said. "I was born in Mobile, Alabama. Julian Croft was just an artistic creation. An artistic creation that destroyed several families. I never wanted to destroy anyone, Isabella. You have to believe that." It was surreal to be having this conversation. The man who had abandoned me the day after our wedding, who had robbed my family, who had threatened me over the phone, now spoke as if we were old friends resolving a misunderstanding. "So what did you want?" I asked. "To survive, to give my family a better life. You can't imagine how hard it is to support a wife and children on a salesman's salary. Support them by robbing other families? I always intended to pay the money back," he said with a sincerity that seemed genuine. "It was a loan, not theft. When my businesses took off, I would have returned everything with interest." "What businesses?" "I was trying to start an investment firm. I needed seed capital. The families who who lent me money were investors. Even confronted with the reality of his crimes, Robert Sterling continued to rewrite history for himself. He wasn't a con man, he was a misunderstood entrepreneur. He hadn't robbed anyone. He had secured investors for his projects. And the marriages? Were they also part of your business? For the first time, he hesitated before answering. The marriages were complicated. I genuinely felt something for some of the women I was involved with. For you, included. Felt what? Love, affection, admiration? You were intelligent, beautiful, determined. Under different circumstances, we could have been happy together. Under different circumstances where you weren't married and weren't robbing me? I always knew the situation was temporary, that at some point I would have to choose between my real family and the others. And you always chose your real family. Yes, but that doesn't mean the feelings weren't real. It was the closest thing to an explanation and an apology I would ever get. Robert was capable of acknowledging he had caused pain, but incapable of fully accepting responsibility for his actions. For him, it had all been a series of unfortunate circumstances, not deliberately cruel choices. Do you know how many families were harmed by your businesses? I asked. A few, he admitted. But I never meant to cause so much damage. Things just got out of control. Got out of control for 15 years? He didn't answer. Robert, whatever your name is, do you have any idea what you did to me? What it was like to wake up the day after my wedding and discover my husband had disappeared? I'm sorry, Isabella. I truly am. But I had no choice. If I had stayed, I would have had to explain about my other life, about my family in Texas. It would have been worse for everyone. Worse for you, you mean? Worse for everyone. You deserved more than I could offer. It was frustrating talking to him. Every answer revealed an impressive ability to rationalize his actions, to turn cowardice into nobility, to convert crimes into altruistic sacrifices. Do you have any regrets? I finally asked. I regret hurting good people like you. I regret complicating my life so much. I regret not finding a legal way to get what I needed. But you don't regret stealing? I never thought of what I did as theft. And there it was, the essence of Robert Sterling, also known as Julian Croft, a man capable of committing elaborate crimes for decades, but incapable of morally recognizing the nature of his acts. To him, it had all been a series of survival strategies in difficult circumstances. The meeting lasted 2 hours. At the end, when the marshals came to get him, Robert turned to me one last time. Isabella, he said, I hope you'll be happy. You deserve to be happy. I am happy, I replied. I built a good life after you left it. Good, he said, and for the first time during the entire conversation, he seemed genuinely relieved. Good. The trial of Robert Sterling lasted 3 months and became a major case in the regional press, not only because of the elaborate nature of the crimes, but also because of the number of victims who came to testify. 12 women from 7 different states, all telling similar stories of seduction, marriage, and abandonment. Robert Sterling was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud and identity theft. He was also ordered to pay restitution to all the victims, although little money was ever recovered. Most of it had been spent over the years to support his family in Texas. His legal wife, Clarice, attended the trial only once. She was a simple woman, visibly shaken to discover her husband's true nature. For all those years, she had believed she was married to a hard-working, honest salesman. I didn't know anything, she told reporters. To me, Robbie was a good man, a dedicated father. I never imagined he had another life. Clarice and her children changed their names and moved to another state after the trial. In a sense, they were also victims of Robert Sterling's crimes. They lost the family's provider and discovered that their entire life had been supported with stolen money. For me, the trial represented the definitive closing of a chapter in my life. For 7 years, Robert, Julian had been a constant presence, first as the love of my life, then as a trauma to be overcome, and finally as a fugitive to be captured. Now, with him imprisoned and tried, I was finally free to move on. And that's exactly what I did. In 1990, at 30, I met Jonathan Miller, a lawyer newly arrived in Asheville to work at the firm that handled our store's legal affairs. John was a widower, father of an 8-year-old girl, and possessed a transparent honesty that was the complete opposite of Robert Sterling's calculated charm. It wasn't love at first sight, as it had been with Julian. It was something more solid, more gradual, based on long conversations about books, politics, business, and on the respectful way he treated my independence and my previous traumatic experience. "Isabella," he told me one night, after months of a friendship that was slowly evolving into something more, "I know you've been through difficult experiences with relationships. I want you to know that I'm in no hurry. We can build our trust in whatever time it takes." It was this patience, this understanding that won me over. John didn't try to seduce me with grandiose promises or excessive charm. He was simply present, reliable, honest about his own flaws and limitations. We married in 1992 in a simple ceremony at our parish church, with only close family and intimate friends. This time, there was no elaborate party, no princess dress, no hundreds of guests. There were just two people who knew each other deeply, deciding to build a life together. With John, I learned what love can be when it's real, not dramatic or overwhelming, but constant and secure. We had 2 sons, Charles in 1994 and Andrew in 1996. We also raised his daughter from his first marriage, Mariana, who accepted me as a stepmother with genuine affection. Our life was built on solid foundations: honest work, shared values, open communication about problems and dreams. John became a partner in the family store, helping to modernize our business and expand into new markets. Together, we transformed Vance's into one of the leading retail businesses in Western North Carolina. But perhaps the most important thing I gained during these years was inner peace, the certainty that I had completely overcome the trauma of abandonment, that I had become a stronger and wiser person because of the painful experience. During the 90s and 2000s, our informal network to combat romance scammers evolved into something more structured. Wayne Casey opened an agency specializing in investigating romance fraud. Mr. Pierce from Savannah financed a foundation that offered legal support to victims of marriage scams, and I became a kind of unofficial consultant, helping other women recognize warning signs in relationships. Miss Miller, a young woman, once told me during a talk I gave at a businesswomen's association, "How do we know if a man is interested in us or in our money?" "By observing his behavior, not just his words," I replied. "A man genuinely interested in you wants to know your personality, your flaws, your real family, not just your financial situation. A man interested only in money is always in a hurry to formalize the relationship and always has vague stories about his own past." Over the years, I helped dozens of women investigate suspicious suitors. In most cases, the men were genuine, but in at least 12 situations, we discovered con artists in action and managed to prevent sham weddings. "You saved my life," one of them told me a few years later. "If I had married that man, I would have lost my entire family inheritance." These experiences taught me that my own tragedy could be transformed into protection for others, that overcome pain can become shared wisdom. Robert Sterling served 12 years of his sentence and was released in 2001. I learned from Wayne Casey that he returned to Texas and tried to rebuild his relationship with his family, but couldn't. His wife had remarried. His children wanted nothing to do with him. He died in 2006, at the age of 53, of a heart attack, alone in a motel room outside Houston. Wayne called to tell me the news, asking if I wanted any details. "No," I replied. "That chapter of my life closed a long time ago." And it was true. Robert Sterling had ceased to have any emotional importance in my life many years before his death. He had become just a painful but overcome memory. Today, at 65, I look back and see a life well lived, despite starting with a tragedy. John passed away in 2022 at the age of 73, after a 30-year marriage that taught me that true love exists and can be built with patience, honesty, and mutual respect. Our children are accomplished adults. Charles is an engineer and has taken over part of the family business. Andrew is a doctor and works in public health. Mariana, my stepdaughter, became a lawyer specializing in women's rights. They all grew up knowing my story, learning that it is possible to recover from any betrayal when you have inner strength and family support. I have 8 grandchildren who fill me with joy, a prosperous company that employs more than 50 people, and the satisfaction of knowing that I helped prevent dozens of romance scams over the years. But most of all, I have peace. The peace of someone who understands that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the best parts of who we become. If Robert Sterling hadn't abandoned me on that May morning in 1982, I probably would have lived an ordinary life, married to a con man, perhaps discovering the truth years later, perhaps living forever in a lie. I wouldn't have become independent, I wouldn't have developed my business skills, I wouldn't have met John, I wouldn't have become a protector of other women. The abandonment that seemed to be my destruction revealed itself, over time, to be my liberation. Grandma Isabella, my eldest granddaughter, asked me recently, "Aren't you angry at the man who abandoned you?" "No, my dear," I replied. "I'm grateful." Grateful? Grateful that he left my life before doing more damage. Grateful that he forced me to discover I was stronger than I imagined. Grateful that he led me to find your grandfather, John, who truly loved me. If a young woman comes to me today telling a story similar to Mania, charming fiancé who appeared out of nowhere, grandiose promises, a rush to get married, vague stories about the past, I always say the same thing. My dear, trust your instincts. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. A man who truly loves you is in no hurry, doesn't hide details of his life, and doesn't want access to your family's money before proving he deserves your trust. And what if I'm being paranoid? Better to be paranoid and find out you were wrong than to be trusting and find out you were right. Time always reveals the truth about people. Trust it and trust yourself. My name is Isabella Vance Miller. I am 65 years old, with a life rebuilt on solid foundations and the certainty that it is possible to recover from any betrayal when you have the courage to start over. If you are listening to this story and recognize yourself in it, know that you are not alone and that it is indeed possible to find true love after being deceived by a convincing imitation. It is possible to be happy again. I am living proof. So, that is my story. Robert Sterling, the man I knew as Julian, ultimately faced justice, and I went on to build a new life, one filled with a love that was real and enduring. But in looking back, I realized this story isn't just my own. It's about the trust we place in others, and the strength we find in ourselves after we fall. So, I want to ask you, has there ever been a time when your intuition whispered a warning, but your heart chose not to listen? What did that experience teach you? I would genuinely love to hear. Please share your story in the comments below, because every experience shared is a lesson for all of us. If you believe in the power of these conversations and want to hear more stories of resilience and new beginnings, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together.